They're coming.
Okay.
They're coming. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. My name is Andrew Jorgensen, and I have the great good fortune to be the General Director of Opera Theater of St. Louis. Thank you for being with us at Works in Process tonight, and we hope that you are I know you're in for a treat to hear about this work that's coming to life. Thank you first to the performers who just started our festivities, pianist Eric Sedgwick and our very own, bravo Eric, and our very own composer at the keys as well, Ricky Ian Gordon. That was a selection from the opening bars of a new opera and the subject of this evening's program, This House. I want to thank Works in Process for inviting Opera Theater of St. Louis to share this upcoming world premiere with you. This will be our company's 45th world premiere, and we are celebrating our 50th season in 2025. And we're grateful to share on this stage some of that work with all of you. I want to emphasize, as I was listening to the supporters who make this evening possible, we have really a number of supporters at Opera Theater who continue to invest in world premieres and to take risks with us. And though none of them are here tonight, I would ask you to join me in acknowledgement of some of our supporters who have made this work possible. In particular, Noemi Nydorf, the Burgess Family Foundation, the Whitaker Foundation, the Fred M. Tsai Endowment Fund, Kim and Tim Eberlein, and the Amphion Foundation. Thank you to all. Opera is a great team sport, and we are grateful for the funders who help to make it possible. This house will open at Opera Theater on Saturday, May the 31st. It runs through June the 29th. You can book your tickets online tonight, and we hope that you'll be inspired to join us during the festival season. But now it's my pleasure to introduce these brilliant creators who are bringing this opera to life and who are with us tonight. I'll begin with the composer seated here to my left, one of today's leading writers of vocal music. His many honors include the Stephen Sondheim Award, the Shen Family Foundation Award, the Constance Klinsky Award, an Obie Award, and several ASCAP awards. He has worked with internationally renowned singers, including Renee Fleming, Nathan Gunn, Kelly O'Hara, Audra McDonald, Frederica von Stade, Nadine Sierra, and many more. The New York Times describes his compositions as blithely blurring the lines between art song and the high-end Broadway music of Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. His previous operas include The Garden of the Finzi Continis at New York City Opera, Intimate Apparel at Lincoln Center Theater, Morning Star at Cincinnati Opera, A Coffin in Egypt at Houston Grand Opera, and many others. In St. Louis, he is best known for his operas 27 and The Grapes of Wrath, which we produced in 2013 and 2017, respectively. We are so thrilled to welcome our composer this evening, Ricky Ian Gordon. I would next like to introduce one of our two co-librettists. She is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner for her plays Ruined and Sweat, and a MacArthur Genius Fellowship recipient. She's developed original projects for major production companies, including Amazon, HBO, and Showtime. She was a writer and producer on the Netflix series She's Gotta Have It, directed by Spike Lee. In 2019, she was included in Time Magazine's list of the 100 most influential people. Some of her recent theatrical pieces include MJ the Musical on Broadway and the operatic adaptation of her own play, Intimate Apparel, which was her first collaboration with Ricky Ian Gordon. We are so honored to be collaborating with her at Opera Theater of St. Louis. Please join me in welcoming Lynn Nottage. The second of our two co-librettists. She's a versatile artist whose creativity spans poetry, nonfiction, playwriting, and new opera. During her student days at Brown University, she focused on Africana studies with the creative mission of exploring Black temporality and disrupting traditional storytelling norms. She is currently completing her studies by pursuing an MFA in writing at Bard College. And although she is a relative newcomer to the opera world, she recently completed a residency at Opera Fusion with the Cincinnati Opera and has also been commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera for a 2027 world premiere. Please join me in welcoming Ruby Aiyo Gerber. Three panelists for tonight's discussion, but before we get started, I want to make two quick acknowledgments of key team members who are bringing this work to life. First, though he is not here, I'd like to acknowledge James Robinson, the director of this house, who was the artistic director of Opera Theater of St. Louis and now serves as the general and artistic director of the Seattle Opera, and who will return to Opera Theater this season to direct the opera. And I also want to acknowledge a colleague who is here this evening, Opera Theater's principal conductor and the conductor of this house, Daniella Candelari. Daniella. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. All right, so let's jump in. This house tells the story of the Walker family and the Harlem brownstone that they have owned since the 1920s. When Zoe Walker returns after many years away from home, she asks her mother, Ida, and her brother, Lindon, to let her renovate the dilapidated building. But they cannot let go of the past. As hidden truths about the family's legacy are revealed, Zoe begins to realize that the secrets harbored within these walls are deeper and more profound than she ever dared to imagine. That is the tee up, and there's a lot to jump into there. But before we dive in further, Ricky, can I ask you to say just a few words about the musical excerpt that you and Eric played to kick us off this evening?
Yes, just to say that I'm actually old enough now to start quoting my own works in my work, and it's an older piece that it never appears in as a whole, like you just heard it in the opera. It's just referenced throughout because I thought it had a particular atmosphere that was right for the piece, but it's an older rag of mine called the Desire Rag. And it just felt right to put it in this piece contextually here and there.
Well, we look forward to hearing how more of it plays out across the opera. Ruby, I want to start with you, I think. This house began as a play that you wrote while at Brown University. As a poet and a writer whose voice is deeply rooted in exploring and sharing the Black experience, can you share with us the inspiration that you had for creating this beautifully layered story and when that happened?
Yeah, I started the piece during the COVID-19 lockdown. And I was just thinking a lot about home and longing for home. I grew up in a multi-generational brownstone that was owned by my grandparents that I inherited at the same time as my grandfather and my mother. So I already was thinking a lot about how Black stories throughout generations can be told in one place, thinking about the materiality of time. But also at the same time, I felt an urgency to tell these stories that were quickly disappearing because so many Black elders were dying, and because COVID disproportionately impacted the Black community. And at the same time, you also saw massive evictions. So you were losing this whole generation of stories and whole histories of places, of families who lived in these homes that in a moment, that's lost. So that was a little bit of what I was thinking about when I was working on this piece.
And I teed up a little bit of the story. Is there anything about the story or the original play that you would want the audience to know as we then transition into talking more about the opera that followed?
Yeah, so it's a ghost story. It's a story of a haunted house. And there's this quote by the poet and essayist Dion Brand that I think I thought a lot about when originally writing this play. And then it made its way into the opera, and I shared it with Lynn during the process. Black experience in any modern city or town in the Americas is a haunting. One enters a room and history follows. One enters a room and history proceeds.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Lynn, you are a celebrated Pulitzer Prize-winning, Tony Award-nominated playwright whose work has been adapted to stages and screens around the world. But your first foray into opera was actually relatively recent, when you and Ricky teamed up for Intimate Apparel at Lincoln Center in 2022. I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about that first collaboration with Ricky, and then maybe to tell us also how the idea for you and Ricky to work together again came up, and how Ruby's play became the subject matter.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack there. So how did Ricky and I come together? I think it began when I was on the Obie Award Committee, and I encountered Ricky's work for the first time, and I just thought it was so incredibly beautiful. And I can't remember, Ricky, whether you called me or you
Yes.
You called me.
Yes.
And so
I Facebooked you.
You Facebooked me. And so when Ricky booked me, I was like thoroughly delighted, just because I didn't know him at that time, but I was such an admirer of his work. And he said, "How would you like to write an opera?" And I thought, yes, I would like to write an opera. And we began talking about the kinds of things that we were both interested in. We read books, we read various librettos, and I think it was about 2 years in which we went back and forth with different material. And finally, Ricky said to me, "I'm interested in Intimate Apparel, your play." And I said, "Oh my God, I've been so afraid to say that for 2 years." And I thought we could have gotten there 2 years earlier, if I had been 100% honest, that I thought that Intimate Apparel's perfect form was an opera. And just in terms of the way that Ricky and I worked together, is that he was a magnificent teacher, and he was very, very patient with me, because I'd gone to the opera, I have been a lover of the form, but I really didn't know anything about writing a libretto. And so Ricky took me through it step by step, and I've told this story several times. Is the first time that I adapted the libretto, I gave it to Ricky, and he said to me, "You have just rewritten your play." And then I went back to the drawing board, I adapted the libretto, and he said, "Oh my God, you have rewritten your play again." And then I said, "Well, I don't understand what it is that I'm doing wrong." And Ricky said, "You're not trusting me as a storyteller. In opera, the composer is doing 60 to 70% of the storytelling. And you have to surrender and trust that when you say, 'I love you,' that you actually don't have to say that. The music can do it." And once I understood that conceptually, I was then able to go back and write the libretto that became Intimate Apparel. And we just had such a delightful collaboration. And when Ricky said, "Let's do it again," I thought, well, of course.
And so when he said, "Let's do it again," and you said, "Of course," how did this house become the subject matter?
Well, as Ruby mentioned, that she wrote the play during COVID, and it was a time in which we were forced to be in our homes for much longer than we anticipated. And I live in the brownstone that I grew up in, and that Ruby grew up in, and it was a 3-generation brownstone, and so very much I was feeling the stories that were in that space. And then I encountered Ruby's play, which I thought was such a wonderful contextualization. It was textured, but most importantly, when I read her play, it felt like it sang. And at the same time, Ricky was saying, "Well, what do you want to do next?" And I said to him, "Well, I just read Ruby's play, and I think it would make a magnificent opera." And then we pitched the idea to him, and he really sparked to it. And so that's how it happened.
All right, so Ruby, what was your reaction when Lynn said, would you want to make this house into an opera?
Surprise. And also delight, because I was like, wow, a writing opportunity so soon after graduating. How exciting. But on a more serious note, I grew up around opera. My late grandfather, Aiyo Gerber, brought me to the opera growing up, so I lost my bracelet. I already had a real appreciation for it, but it made so much sense for the play. I wrote the play to be really challenging, in that there's a lot of moments that are tricky to stage, but so beautifully translate into music. For instance, the house is a character, so when one of the singers speaks, not only is she her character, she's also a crack in the third floor window as the wind blows through. And that makes sense for a soprano. And so the music can convey some of that poetry in a way that I think just a play couldn't.
Ricky, I need to skip ahead because Ruby has just brought up a question that I was going to ask you later, but you've talked quite a lot about the house as a character in the opera, and Ruby's just shared a little bit about that. Tell us about writing the house as a character, how you did that, how we should think about that, what that meant musically. What can you share about that?
Well, I did not, because the way it's presented, it says the house breathes 3 times. I mean, the first time we're introduced to the house. And I just felt like this is an opera and everything's gonna be sung. I don't want like a sound effect of, and there is something we're trying, which is all the reed players in the orchestra are breathing into their reeds, but in general, I came up with another language altogether musically that where the house sings, and that little motif that happens throughout the evening is it's 12-tone, it's serial, and it's eerie, and it was the right atmosphere, and which you'll just hear one of the breaths tonight with these fantastic Manus students. But that was it. That if there was a line like the sound of water running through the pipes, I just said to Lynn and Ruby, that's going to be sung. So it's sung. If the sound of wind on a window, it's sung. And once I made that decision, it was because I had to keep it in my language, and it had to be exciting to me vocally.
I think this is your first opera in partnership with 2 co-librettists.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that journey. What was it like? How was it different? And then I want to ask Lynn and Ruby the same question about what it was like to partner. But Ricky, please.
Well, just one of the really sweet things, obviously, is they love each other. And whenever I would write to Lynn while I was setting it to music, and I would say, oh my God, who wrote this lyric? And like 5 times she wrote back to me, Ruby's magic. And just that, there was this sense, Ruby is a very fresh writer. It feels like she just came off the grid, and it's such beautiful, fresh writing a lot of times, and with a sort of skewed, wonderful viewpoint. And Lynn is like a genius at scaffolding and making a building. It just felt like the perfect pair to write this libretto. And I had called Jim Robinson, it was during the pandemic, and said, I want to write another opera for Opera Theater of St. Louis, which is the greatest place to work. So I said, I think I should write it with Lynn. And so then I asked Lynn, and she said this play, and I just thought, fantastic. I thought, all right, there's already a story, a mother and a daughter team.
Well, so I'm not sure we had actually said that out loud till just now. Does everyone know that Lynn and Ruby aren't just collaborators? Also, Lynn happens to be Ruby's mother. And so I want to ask you about not just forging a new professional partnership, but about working together as a mother-daughter team. How did you go about creating the libretto? Did you divide and conquer? Did you work together? Was it the cliche of mother and daughter working together? Tell us about that partnership.
It's like yes, yes, and yes. Is the answer to those questions. Just to begin, and then Ruby, you can jump in at any point. It was really an amazing collaboration. And of course, when you tiptoe into something like this, you think, oh, maybe it won't work, maybe there are too many sensitivities, maybe there's too much history, but we found that the absolute opposite was true, that we actually collaborate together very well and very smoothly. And I think a lot of it has to do with what Ricky said, is that we have different skill sets. Ruby is a magnificent poet and just has this ability to conjure language in ways that are repeatedly surprising. And my skills, because I come from the playwriting world, is just, he said scaffolding, is that, and structure and organization. And I think that we complemented each other really in a loving and lovely way.
Yeah, I agree with everything she said. The only small thing I would add is that we can also be very blunt in a way I think other collaborators can't be.
That is so true. At some point, I remember writing something and Ruby's like, oh my God. And she's like, that is
was that a good oh my
no,
God?
it was
or
like the worst oh my God. She's like, you could do so much better than that.
And I think you might have told me in a different conversation that you ended up dividing, that one of you took on most of the arias and one of you took on most of the recitative. Is that?
Yeah, I think that that's true, but not. But I think we did both. I think it was a kind of seamless collaboration.
Well, I think we need to move on to our next musical excerpt. And I'm going to ask Lynn to set the stage for where we are in the plot at this moment. And then, Ricky, I think this is a sort of a very important part of the work to you. And you wanted to say a few words about it.
No, this is not Valencia yet.
This is the aria.
This is the aria.
Yes.
Yes.
So the aria that you're going to hear, which is Harlem is a Fire with Change, comes relatively early in the opera, and it's after Zoe, who is pregnant, is returning home to her to the dilapidated brownstone where her brother and mother live, and she has news, which is that she not only wants to move home, but that she's pregnant. And so the aria is her delivering that news, but also saying to her mother and brother, who have refused to engage with the fact that Harlem is changing, that there's a new world out there that they have to confront. And so the aria is going to be sung by Briana Hunter and the pianist. Oh yes. I'm going to read the lyric first.
Oh, please.
Harlem is a fire. Oh, Mama, I miss you. I have happy news. If you look around, Harlem is a fire with change. Corner card games gone, old reefer spots turned into private gardens. Where there was once abandoned lots, white folks pay top dollar. The world doesn't stop because you two refuse to see it. Buildings going up, relics coming down, so much life on every corner calling out to you.
Please welcome mezzo-soprano Briana Hunter and pianist Eric Sedgwick.
Oh,
Ricky, I think that's a very important part of the opera to you. What do you want to tell us about that excerpt, about why you chose it tonight?
First of all, one of the reasons I chose it is because unlike unlike almost all the operas I've written, it's full of flashes as opposed to very specific arias that you can extract. And so I had to be careful about what I could pick that was actually long enough to be an aria. So I do really like that aria because it's almost as if, Zoe's come home to tell her family that she's pregnant. And I love the energy of that aria. But really, it was everything about this. I'm just going to say this to be completely honest. It's always scary. It's like taking the dress out of the closet before the wedding. And usually, when you do this, you have been rehearsing something, and then you come and you do it, like almost everyone I've done. This one, we haven't even gone through this music ourselves. So this is the first time we're hearing it. So it's like a little bit like even when I played the forehand thing with Eric, I was so bad playing it that, Eric, I'm not playing the forehand on the next thing. It's such a first time. But so those are the things, the selections tonight were just things that could be extracted. But I really love this opera, so that's not to say like, oh, that's just this because I could extract it. I love the explosion she has, and I love the lyrics.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing it with us. I want to continue a little bit on the themes surfaced in the libretto, and I think some of the themes we've just heard in that aria. It is not lost on me that we are debuting this house in St. Louis, a place that has an extremely troubled history as it relates to policies that have created economic disparity between white and black Americans, with homeownership being one really glaring example. Lynn and Ruby, the libretto does not specifically name gentrification. I don't think that's a word that we hear in the opera, but it's a clear and it's a consistent theme that I think underlies some of the story. Can you talk to us about how you were thinking about that theme as you brought this story forward? And I think also how the generational difference, this is a multi-generational family that we're meeting, how did those members of the family interact differently with this very challenging world?
Sure, just to begin with, I think that we were trying to figure out, and Ruby's play does this, is how to tell the story of black migration and settlement through one family story and in just one space. And so the opera begins with Minus Walker, who is the son of a sharecropper, coming north to Harlem during the Great Migration with a little bit of money, and he's able to purchase this brownstone, which becomes the seed that he plants for his entire family. And then we sweep through 100 years of what happens to this black family through the changing Harlem, through the Harlem Renaissance, through the Black Power movement, through then the displacement of black folks in Harlem. And we tell that story not on sort of an uber scale, but through the intricacies of one family. And, it kind of begins with Beulah, who's a woman who grows up in this brownstone that's in jeopardy. And she fights tooth and nail to keep it so that her two daughters can inherit it. And Ruby, maybe you want to say something about that.
Yeah, so then the next generation of women you have are Lucy and Ida, who are both kind of contending with coming of age in this moment in which you're seeing both a lot of change in the way people talk about black families, and then also black liberation. So one sister sees her future and sees the future of the family through collective action, through the black liberation movement, while the other sees it as a return to home, a return to family and focusing on the family. So the way the tension in that generation around the house and keeping the house is do we center it around the family and this is just a place for our family and it stays within the family, or do we expand what we think of as family and who this house can serve and who this house can hold? Do you want to go to the next generation?
And so the next generation is of course Zoe, who grew up in Harlem and is not, unlike myself, I grew up in the brownstone in Brooklyn in a neighborhood that was at first kind of tough and kind of rough. And when I left, I thought, I never want to return. I want to find someplace different, only to go away and discover that I really yearned for the things that my house and my community gave me. And at the time I was returning, my community was shifting. It was being gentrified. And so I yearned even more for that community and wanted to rescue it. And I think that that's part of why Zoe returns home. It's not just to be home, but to restore the things and that she loved about Harlem and the things that she loved about community.
Ricky, Lynn, and Ruby have given you this sort of unbelievable swath of history and themes. How does that show up in the music that you have given us?
That's part of the fun, is that creating the motifs for the characters, and that there is so much history in generation to generation, and finding that in writing the score and illustrating the characters. It was really a fun piece to write because, I've said this before, but I'm just a trash can of American music, and this opera is sort of eclectic in that way.
Ricky Ian Gordon, a trash can of American music.
Trash can. Just say trash can.
I can see it now.
I like to think of you as a master of the American songbook.
Oh, I like that. Thank you, Lynn.
I think we'll use that one instead.
Trash can of the American song.
So for all three of you, what are you hoping that people will take away from this work? What themes, what do you want us thinking about, or maybe what do you want us humming the next day?
I do think, I think it's very moving. I really do. And, you don't want to say anything because I don't want to give it away, but I think it's very moving, and there are ways that each of the plots gets sewn together at the end that is truly, I think, stunning. That was one of the, oh my God, Lynn, who wrote these words? And it was the Ruby's magic words. And I was very moved writing this opera, and we'll talk about that in the next scene that's being done.
I have to tell our audience, at the opera, we're not used to trying to not give away the end. Usually you walk in and the synopsis is...
She's dead.
We know how it's going to end. Ricky has challenged us not to give away exactly how this work ends. And for someone steeped in opera, that's really hard to do. That was very, very smooth, Ricky.
Thank you.
Ruby, what do you want people to take away from this experience?
Yeah, I think something I want people to take away is the non-linearity of history, especially in this moment where we see a lot of institutions having to kind of contend with DEI and remove Black history or take it out of context, take it out of the context of the transatlantic slave trade, all of these different moments in which it's like, oh no, that just happened. But the past is always present. Whenever we step into a building, we have to think of all of the different hands that touched the stone to build it, all of the lives that passed through. History's always present, and it's very, very present for Black Americans every single day, and that's something,
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, that was really beautifully put, and I just want to echo that sentiment, is that we really want people to think about space and to sustain the complexity of space, which seems even more important today as we're simplifying the ways in which we not just look at American history, but the ways in which we think about who we are collectively. So I think that that's what we want people to take away, is just the complexities of every space that exist in this country, and that there are a multitude of stories that are behind, as Ruby said, the stones that have been placed and the floorboards and everything.
So one of the things that I love about each of the three of you, and one of the things I love about our privilege to commission new opera, is that we get to draw from multiple art forms and to create fresh experiences for our audience by drawing from many different sources. And I know that each of the three of you are inspired by many different things and are sort of omnivores in collecting and observing art around you. So I want to ask you, what do you find yourselves coming back to? What's inspiring you these days? Maybe what inspired this, but what inspires you today?
Is it me?
All three, please.
You know, the thing that inspires me, other than music, I'm very inspired by poetry, and I'm very inspired by cinema. I'm obsessed to the point of being sick with foreign film, and I'm having like a Lee Chang Dong festival for myself at my house right now. But I love film, I love poetry. That's why I've set so many poems to music. And I mean, can you believe how brilliant these two women are? I love them. They inspire me.
You're here. Lynn, what inspires you these days?
Yeah, like Ricky, I'm a consumer of all thing artistic art. But in particular, I'm inspired by visual arts. If you come to our home, you'll find that every single wall is like covered with a different piece of art. And still, I remained obsessed with finding more stories out there that visual artists are telling. But what inspires me in particular is that I have this Lobi sculpture, which is an African fertility sculpture that literally could have been carved 1,000 years ago, or it could have been carved yesterday. But every time I look at it, and it's weathered and it's heavy, but the lines are very simple, but there's so much storytelling and economy to that sculpture, and it just for me is a reminder of how little you need to tell a complicated story. And whenever I get stuck, I just see her standing there in my corner, and I think about the artists who took the time to carve that beautiful piece of art out of a very hard piece of wood. And so that inspires me. And then the other thing I'd like to say is that I teach. And so every week I'm reading new stories by young storytellers. And I think that that's really foundational to my own practice as an artist, is engaging and being in conversation with young artists.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Can I say a quick thing, Andrew?
Of course.
It's recently, there was a birthday party at Lynn's house. Tony gave her a party, and I walked into that house and thought, oh, that house is the opera. It feels so alive with art and culture, and it really felt like the opera.
What's inspiring you?
I am both inspired by cinema and visual art, but I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction and say that I'm really inspired by my friends and the wonderful people I'm around who, in this moment in which the future, because of their identities, the future is so unclear and possibilities seem limited, and yet I am inspired by these wonderful people in my life who are having to forge these non-existent futures that are actively being jeopardized, that are actively being erased or have never even been imagined. And so I think that's something I'm really inspired by.
Maybe not just inspiration, but maybe that's also giving you hope.
It is giving me hope.
That's a question I've been asking every artist I come into contact with these days. We look to artists in times of challenge and change to help us find the way, to help us find hope. And so we'll have one more big excerpt of music this evening, but my last big question for you three, what is giving you hope at this moment of challenge and change in our country?
You answer first. I have to think about this.
Okay. I actually,
Nothing.
I have a couple of answers to that question, and one comes. I was at a talk that Imani Perry, cultural critic, gave, and one of the things that she said is that hope is not a given. It's a muscle that we have to exercise and that we have to invest in it every single day. And I think about just what is the discipline of waking up and trying to be hopeful. And so I feel like I'm hopeful that I can find ways to hope. And that it is the muscle that I'm working on. And then, you know, the other part of your question was like, artists having a responsibility. I was at a talk the other day that Wole Soyinka, who is a venerable playwright, and he said, you know, artists don't have any more responsibility to this moment than the rest of us do. But what we can and how we can position ourselves is to continue to invest in our work and to tell our truths. And at this time, that investment may mean that we're writing a comedy. It may mean that we're digging very deeply into telling a complicated story about what's happening in our country today, or it may be as simple as painting something that's so beautiful that the viewer can't look away. And I think that, you know, that's our responsibility, is just to continue to invest in building a space in which we can tell our own truths.
Thank you for that.
That was beautiful to hear, Lynn. And I will say, okay, there's a few things. One thing that gives me hope is resistance. The idea that there is a resistance, and we just saw enormous evidence of it. It made me think of one of my favorite lines is William Carlos Williams, who said, because I really believe poetry is like, one time I was having lunch with Tony Kushner, and I was really mad because at Barnes & Noble, they had the new bookshelf, and it didn't have the new collected Stanley Kunitz poems. And I was like, how could they leave that out? And we talked about how poetry is so often ignored, and yet civilizations rise and fall on the power of those lines. And there's a great line, you cannot get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And so for me, it's poetry, but the poetry of painting, the poetry of art, the poetry of music. And that is what gets me up in the morning. I want to say something about it. I recently, and Lynn knows this because I wrote a poem called Oh America, and I started it like in the pandemic, and it took years. And that felt like resistance to me. You know, it just, writing, being poetry.
Thank you. Ruby, you want to have the last word here?
No.
Well, you started us on that question, so I think we've heard from you there. We do have one more big excerpt for you this evening, but we are coming to the close of our time together. Before we hear some music, I first want to thank these incredible creators for sharing their art and their time tonight.
Thank you.
And we'll applaud for them when they finish singing, but I want to thank these artists, our pianist and our singers, for joining us tonight. We hope that what you have heard this evening inspires you to visit us in St. Louis this May and June to see this house in person for yourselves. We would love to welcome you to our 50th anniversary festival season, which also includes new productions of Die Fledermaus, Don Pasquale, and Benjamin Britten's A Midsummer Night's Dream. I want to thank Works in Process for hosting us this evening. We are grateful and honored to be here and to be among the organizations and pieces of art that you are featuring. And now we will close with a big, beautiful selection. This is the Valencia duet. Ricky, will you please set this up?
Yes, well, so Zoe has come home, and her brother Lyndon is a painter, and he is gay, and he's not well. And for one thing, is trying to get them to renovate this house, which is practically falling down on them. But in the midst of this scene, Thomas comes home, and Thomas is Lyndon's lover. He's a chef, and he's very excited because he has an idea for getting Lyndon out of the house. And the idea is he wants to get Lyndon to Valencia, Spain. And that is the excitement of this scene. Is there anything else?
Yeah,
Yes.
one thing I'll add, this was actually one of the first scenes written.
Yes.
So before there was a beginning or an end. This
Yes,
scene
and I'll say this, you guys, that when I finished writing the scene, because I knew that they both were very happy with the scene that they had written. I really wanted to make something beautiful, and when it was done, I myself was really moved by it, and I sent them. I wrote a book during the pandemic. I wrote a memoir, and I had just written this huge center section on AIDS, and I sent it to you guys just to say, like, this is where I've been. Anyway, yes.
Please welcome baritone Jorell Williams, bass baritone Christian Pursell, pianist Eric Sedgwick, and a chorus of the house's voices sung by students from the Mannes School of Music. Thank you.
heavier, but I didn't want to say so. Stuffy, why don't you get some air? I'll talk to him.
Thank you, Thomas. Consider my offer.
This place suddenly feels crowded. Meant to come earlier, the train was slow, and work kept me busy. Men with excuses don't make love, but fuck themselves alone. Not going to ask, not going to show. Well, what if I told you the train wasn't slow? So I wandered the street, trying to bottle the stars, a drink I could bring to your door. The stars. Who knew the old man working the bar happened to have a bottle of stars, bottled in Spain, sold to me only a few blocks away from Spain. How'd you know that that's what I crave? Spain, you forgot I know you. Even if you don't know yourself, what's wrong? What did Zoe say to you? She wants to remodel, subdivide, but I'm not ready to let go of what we have here. Maybe it's time to finally see what's beyond these walls. You've allowed yourself to become too small. This world hasn't been kind to me. Behind city stench, news-made manure, and car horn cries, lies us. The new urban old, not talking about running, but sharing space in one another. Somewhere far, far away, Valencia, with me, troubles melting away, drifting out past the sun on the Mediterranean Sea. Valencia, in Spain, Valencia, of all the places, Valencia, fantasy is Valencia, Spain. Valencia, we don't even speak Spanish. My own little restaurant, you paint the walls, canary or marigold, a brilliant blue cerulean. Each day I go to market, pick out the freshest fish. Fishermen with hands fluent in water. next words. Thomas. Suddenly I hear the loud city breaking, a Valencia quiet, as if it's time to say goodbye. I see the Valencian we imagine goodbye, long by long. Then come. But Thomas, I'm afraid of what's happening, so much weaker than before. If tomorrow's a hurricane, my body battered by today's storm. Every day aging faster, one day the next unknown. We're never growing old. We're never growing old. Thomas. Lindon. If I had